Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 782. Saturday night. On Saturday morning, Klein, who was wearing pajamas, rubbed his head and got out of bed. He didn't sleep well, as different women would inevitably enter his dreams, scaring him awake. He needed to spend several seconds to calm his emotions before returning to sleep again. Thankfully, this weakness only lasts 6 hours, and there's no need for me to head out in the middle of the night. I didn't have to face the maids. Klein sighed as he pulled the rope beside his bed. Richardson, who had been waiting outside, immediately entered with the clothes his employer needed to wear. I've no idea what Rhodes said. Richardson seems to try to avoid me when facing me. Was it the kind of ladies he mentioned he likes, and that it happens to also be at odds with how society views it? Klein happened to only hear the magic mirror mention the kind of women that butler Walter liked when he rushed back. He wasn't sure what had happened prior to that. He didn't use dream divination to obtain the corresponding information, as he didn't feel that it was necessary. After all, with Richardson's personality, he wouldn't have the courage to take action no matter who he liked. It wouldn't have had any additional effects. After changing into his clothes, Klein headed to the second story and walked to the dining room. Walter was wearing white gloves as usual, waiting by the entrance. Upon seeing Dwayne Dante's approach, he took a step forward and bowed politely. "Good morning, sir. You have 2 lessons today. In the evening you will be participating in the banquet at Mr. Portland Moment's place." Portland Moment lived at 100 Beauclund Street. He was a full-time professor at Backlund University's Department of Engineering, a fellow at the Lone Kingdom Imperial Science Institute. As he had discovered a few metal alloys, he had received the Light of Machinery Award, and he was just second to people like Turani von Helmesuen in the world of academics. Furthermore, the few metal alloys were widely used in ship and steam engine construction. Just the licensing patent was enough to make him a tycoon with a wealth of hundreds of thousands of pounds. Upon hearing Walter, Klein casually glanced at him, realizing that he had some dark eye circles. His eye bags were a little puffy, making him look different from usual. It was as though he hadn't slept well the entire night. If not for a faceless powers, Dwayne Dante's would probably look the same. Klein retracted his gaze in pity and didn't speak further. As he nodded gently in response to Walter's greetings, he entered the dining hall. To be honest, Klein was rather impressed with him. He was able to hold back his fantasies and stop himself from approaching her to seek out pleasure, despite frequently meeting a demoness. All he did was have wet dreams that included the target when alone at night. One had to know that a demoness, especially one who was in the midst of or having passed the pleasure sequence, had a charm that far exceeded a beyonder's effects towards males. Every action was filled with a charm that made any men who came close to them feel intoxicated and lost. It was like consuming opiates and gradually developing into something more serious, to the point of not being able to extricate oneself from the pleasure given by a demoness. Perhaps only gay men could effectively resist such charms. Of course, Klein suspected that gay men were not immune to it either. This was because one's mind and hormones would be affected, creating changes that originally didn't exist. Furthermore, a large number of demonesses were men to begin with. This lowered one's psychological resistance. And precisely because of this, even though he was a sequence 5 beyonder, Klein had to constantly maintain a high-strung state when facing demonesses like Trissy and Tracy. He was afraid that any mishap might cause him to be charmed. Even he wasn't immune to such effects, much less an ordinary person like Butler. Walter. This wasn't something that willpower alone could resist. Although perhaps being a result of Prince Edisac's death or her own advancement, Trissy was clearly able to rein in her charms. Walter is only an ordinary person. Even if he is one, he's at best a sequence 9 or 8. For him to maintain his present state implies how strong his self-restraint is. He's very loyal to Prince Edisac, and he loves his wife and daughter. As Klein sighed, he sat down. Breakfast today was his favorite desi pie. The oil that effused out of it made him salivate. The sea late at night was nearly black as it was faintly dyed with a sliver of crimson red. It was calmer and quieter than in the day. The Blue Avenger was ebbing up and down in the waves like a ghost as it cruised towards the crimson moon. Alger Wilson stood at the bow, looking far away at the waves. On the surface, he appeared staid as usual, but deep down, he could hardly hold back his agitation. Ahead of him was the abyss maelstrom north of Sonia Island. As it was a dangerous vortex that was famous for appearing without any signs, no ship was willing to enter these dangerous waters. After delivering the report and leaving Pasu Island, Alger commandeered the Blue Avenger all the way north, where they circled around Sonia Island and headed for this area. Midway, they had docked at a harbor for resupplies without wasting any more time. As for whether he would be suspected for heading north, Alger wasn't worried. This was because the Church of Storms was happy to have its captains head north of the Sonia Sea and the Fog Sea in order to obtain intel on the Faisak Empire, Intis Kingdom, Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, and the Church of the God of Combat. Looking back at his ship, Alger walked deckside, took out a charm made of tin, held it in his palm, and chanted the incantation. "Storm!" A blue flame soared and devoured the charm. Alger suddenly sensed a baffling affinity with all the fish in the ocean beneath him. At that instant, both parties were able to communicate at the psyche level. The tin charm was one of the items he had obtained from his resupply at Paso Island, allowing him to have an affinity with undersea creatures, providing a crude level of psychic communication with him. Amidst his thoughts, Alger didn't think of obtaining any intel. All he did was wait for the Blue Avenger to approach the abyss maelstrom and make a second attempt. Seconds turned into minutes as Alger, who had failed nearly 100 times, finally learned from a spindle-like fish about where Obninsks often appeared. "If I didn't know that the target is near the abyss maelstrom, I would have long given up. It's really difficult to grasp any reliable information through a brute force search," Alger concluded as he touched his pocket. He had already used up most of his affinity charms, with only 5 left. "I'll have to get another batch of them when I return. Others must not discover that I've expended all these. I heard the Roasted Archipelago's resistance has plenty." Heh. As Alger was pondering, he changed the direction of the Blue Avenger for the spot he had just learned about. About an hour passed as the Blue Avenger stopped. Alger casually took out a sealed metal bottle. This was the sanguine anesthetic gas that he had spent 130 pounds to buy from the moon. He had no doubt in regards to its effects because he had used one in the past. As the Blue Avenger was a ghost ship, it didn't need many people to man it at night. There was only one person every night who was in charge of watching the ship, preventing it from deliberately creating problems or cruising into dangerous waters. As the captain, Alger had arranged himself to be on duty that night without anyone noticing. After he was done with his preparations, he came to the door of the sailors, took out a metallic pipe, and opened the bottle. He released the gas into each room, without even sparing the storeroom which stored all kinds of sundry. It was in case certain members of the crew were playing cards in there instead of sleeping. After doing all of this, Alger, who wasn't in a rush to concoct the potion, brought the ingredients with him, changing into a diving suit that was made of shark skin. He leaped from the starboard and into the water, without causing any splashes. Under the dark and calm waters, Alger's eyes gradually turned dark blue, allowing him to see his surroundings clearly. He breathed in the air within the water comfortably as he arrived in a pitch-black deep sea. Then, he used the affinity charm once again to communicate with the surrounding fish that were of different shapes and sizes. With the advice from the kind fish, Alger identified his bearings and swam as he asked, finally arriving at what seemed like an underwater volcano. The fish actually didn't know that an Obninsk stayed here. They only knew that their own kind and a number of top deep-sea hunters often disappeared in the vicinity. With his beyonder powers, Alger looked far ahead and saw the huge, black cave in the undersea volcano. Tentacles that were thicker than pythons found in a southern continent primitive forest gently flailed outwards. The huge suckers and patterned skin, as well as the cave that was several times the size of the Blue Avenger, left Alger apprehensive as he didn't dare approach. An Obninsk is at least a powerful Sequence 5. Furthermore, it has a terrifying body. I can confirm that it's my target. Alger carefully swam over and stopped at a distance from the threat. After careful identification, he used the affinity charm once again. Following that, he allowed his spirituality to pass through the water and reach into the cave in an attempt to communicate with the powerful psyche force that was huddled inside. The massive psyche slowly relaxed as countless thoughts were released. It was taken aback for a moment before its psyche suddenly erupted like a volcano. Roar! Amidst the terrifying sound, the cave produced a ludicrous vortex that sucked the surrounding water, trash, as well as Alger towards it. It's filled with animosity. Alger's pupils constricted as his body turned slippery as he was driven by a formless wind backward in an attempt to escape. He used several beyonder powers before escaping the influence of the vortex. He didn't dare stay near the undersea volcano, and he quickly surfaced before opening up a gap. Almost a minute later, Alger, who had escaped the dangerous area, spat out bubbles as he heaved a sigh of relief. That ordnance can actually resist the influence of charms that increase an affinity with sea creatures. Does it hate items with the Lord's aura? After some thought, Alger, who didn't wish to waste this opportunity, steeled his resolve since he had already come this far. He began using Elvish to pray amidst the seawater. The fool that doesn't belong to this era,